But these lies, they just undercut your ability to recognize or have faith in anything. So they can create fear. These lies create this fear that we struggle to get away from. And getting back to ChatGPT and AI, the reason I'm starting to feel like I'm in an echo chamber is because I'm recognizing that it's actually spewing out all this information based upon what has been fed to it. So if you can only take from that which has already passed, then you will never form a novel thought. You will never gain novelty from something if you're only using a combination of that which is already passed.
On Stories of Self, we go on journeys into the lives of ourselves and others. We see how stories connect, how they diverge, and how we can create our worlds and solve our problems. This is the real-life remix of storytelling, which is so often stranger than fiction. So come and sit around the fire, chill by the ocean, or get a coffee with me, as I delve into the stories of self that make, break, and remake us. Some stories are dramatic, some are serene, some will magically mirror you, and some will be delightfully different. I'm your host, Katie Reeve Arnold, and this is Stories of Self.
So something I've been thinking about a lot recently is what comes first, science fiction or science fact? The chicken or the egg? I guess it kind of feels like a never-ending twisting cycle that we actually can't really know the answer to necessarily. But it's an interesting one to think about because as we look more and more at what's going on in our world today, we can actually see some of the stories that we've heard across the years that were written maybe sometimes many, many years ago, even decades, nearly 100 years ago, and they're kind of coming to truth, coming into fact now. And so what happened? Did those writers predict the future? Or did they actually create the future somehow by writing what they did? It's kind of interesting. I see it from my perspective. I remember as a really little girl turning around and telling my teachers in school when they asked what the future would be like, and we had to draw what the future was like. I drew a little kind of black box that kind of we all carried with us. I thought it would be more like the size of a book, more looking like a Kindle. And I thought we were going to carry it with us and it would have all the information in the world on it. And I contradicted them when they said, you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket all the time. And I said that yes, this would have all the information in the world and it would have a calculator on it. Now, I said all that to them more than 20 years before the first iPhone was released. So this is a time way before the popular use of mobile phones. So it's just, what happens there? Is it actually, did I predict the future somehow? I don't really think so. I think there's ideas kind of dropping in, and these ideas don't just drop into me, for example. So that kind of idea that I came up with, that was a common thread going through our society, going through others. And that was actually how other people came up with those ideas to create those things, because that common thread was something that was happening for lots of people at that time, something that could be useful, yeah? And so what's happening in our society now can really feel like someone like Margaret Atwood, when she wrote The Handmaid's Tale, did she actually, predict this happening, or did she make this happen? Now, the reality is that when we get presented with that information, that we can either move towards it or we can move away from it. It's just an idea. It's just a concept of what would happen if we continue down a certain road or if we take a certain road, right? And so George Orwell is really, really famous for this, and it's really coming into the media a lot at the moment. as he wrote the book 1984. And now he wrote that, most of the time he wrote it, it's a bit of a play on the term, because most of the time that he wrote that, he actually wrote it in 1948. So, but that's something that we're actually seeing coming more and more into the present now, some of the things that he predicted through it. It's interesting as well from another perspective, because George Orwell, his real name was actually Eric Blair. And so there's a question in there for me about why do people use pseudonyms? And I would say that the use of a pseudonym, as I probably intend to use one myself for writing, it's actually to overcome a form of imposter syndrome. So that imposter syndrome that kind of tells you that why should it be you? Who's going to listen to you? Who's going to be interested in what you're doing? That imposter syndrome is a part of your ego that's kind of keeping you small, telling you all the negatives, showing you all the bad things that can happen. And it's important to recognize some of the bad things in order that you can kind of move forwards aware of them and choose if you still want to move forwards. But we can't be held back by our fear that all the negatives will definitely happen. That's not true. In the same way as we can't know for certain as we step forward that all the positives will definitely happen. We just step forwards and we create as we go. So this use of this pseudonym actually, I think, kind of freed him from this imposter syndrome, like born by his ego. And it freed his soul to kind of come out and actually express the ideas, express the concepts that he wanted to, without putting his real name to it, his name that he grew up with, his name that was linked to all the compression and oppression and the kind of things that were fed to him and the ideas that he was told to hold to when he was growing up, the concepts he was given that he swallowed whole. And so he stepped away from those in an easier way by using a different name. And so then moving on from that, it's really important to notice that he kind of created this incredible, complete fictional world. And so at the time he was creating it, 1948, it was complete fiction there. And then even as he entitled it 1984, but even in 1984, we weren't actually seeing these things coming to fruition as much as we are now. He's created this world with its rules and the episodes that are happening in it, and it's all moving towards this inevitable conclusion, which really makes you feel that this character is just so stuck in this situation that there's nothing else they can do. And he used the character from that book. He used it to kind of show an undermining of democratic society. And that undermining is via lies. So there's so many lies that were actually converted in the book 1984 to be spoken as truth. And so in that, it's a bit like the gaslighting that we were discussing in the last episode. It's actually creating this confusion and fear and uncertainty in society in 1984 and in the individual about what actually is true. And I spoke in the last episode about gaslighting, about how this is now becoming more obvious to me throughout society. Small lies, small changes, small gaslights that people are using to try and ease their own way. Sometimes big ones, I suppose, as well. But have a look out and see if you can notice the small ones. Things that people are using to ease their own way, but that actually bring other people's reality into question. They're changing the reality of others and changing the reality that belongs to us as a whole in order to fit their own purposes. And in doing that, they're not owning the true reality we share, and they're not owning up to anything that they've done, like not perfectly or wrong. No one can do anything perfectly, the way. I don't mean it quite like that. But they're not showing up to anything that they've kind of done wrong. So instead of telling somebody that, oh, I got that wrong, I didn't mean to seat you at that table, I got it wrong, you should have been seated at this table, they come over and they say, oh, I told you couldn't sit there, you were supposed to sit over here. And it's just a very small kind of lie. But actually, what I'm seeing when I look around and I see these small lies permeating through in every day, have a look and see if you can notice them. What I see is this undercutting, this undermining of the truth in our lives and in society as a whole. So this is kind of what happened in the book 1984 with Newspeak. So with Newspeak and with the Thought Police and with Double Think and with Big Brother always watching, it undercut the reality of the people with a new reality. And in fact, they brought in this idea, George Orwell brought in this idea of revising history. So actually, he stated that because records were digitalized, they could easily then be manipulated. Any records could easily be manipulated. So you can revise history and you can change it, and by that you can dominate society. And so if you're going to revise history, you can control the present because history is written by the victor. But if you can go back into history and change it, then you're changing how we have come to the present. And in which case, you're controlling the present, the past, and the future via that construct. Now, that's something that's quite popularized as an idea from 1984. But I would suggest that actually, it depends how you're going to interact with the present and the future going forwards. I'm not arguing that the past isn't important. I'm not arguing that history isn't important. I'm arguing that actually, when we look at the past, when we look at history, we need to reflect on the degree to which we think it's true, the degree to which we think it's full, the degree to which we think it's controlled, manipulated, changed, the degree to which we think it's aligned with one particular perspective. So this is kind of interesting for me because I think that this kind of comes in line with something I'm seeing a lot on social media, and I'm seeing a lot of people using it, and I find it quite interesting because, you know, ChatGPT and AI and that kind of concept, they're really, it's a really impressive thing, right? But I'm starting to feel like I'm in an echo chamber. And people will tell you that you can use AI for things and no one's going to be able to notice. I'm telling you, I can notice. I'm telling you, I can see through the bullshit of I've had AI do this for me. Because what AI does is it's using an algorithmic kind of process based upon or involving multi-layered perceptrons. Now, I did a programming course. I'm not a programmer, hey, but I was so interested in how they're saying it's learning. How does it collect this data? How does it accrue this data? How does it select this data? How does it progressively, when given more, come to a new, other, or different conclusion? You might be really bored right now, sorry. But I found it interesting because it's forming our world right now. This stuff is being pushed at you all the time. And so these multi-layered perceptrons, which unfortunately my brain will turn around. If I say multi-layered perceptron like it's something from Transformers, I'm sorry, but that's how my brain thinks of it. So the whole way through the course, that's how I thought of it. So realistically, though, what they're doing is they're using data from that which is past. So it's taking from that which is fed to it or that which is available to it, and it's creating from that. It's drawing out answers from that. But if you only take from that which is past, for a start, that's easily manipulatable. Manipulable? Yeah. That can easily be manipulated. So that can easily be manipulated, as we've already talked about, going through those records and changing history. That's exactly what George Orwell was kind of bringing to the forefront. And it's interesting to notice, even in our news media right now, the way that the ways we're being told and presented things are changing. So have a look around, have a look in the news, have a look in the information around you, and recognize, is there something there that 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years ago, you were told something different? Now, has it evolved because we have more information, so it's grown and we've got more understanding? Has somebody turned around and told you, oh, what we thought then was wrong, and we now know this? Or have they just told you that this was the way it was all along? Have they just disregarded the past and changed the present to suit them, in so changing the history and kind of trying to own the future of it? So this is a big thing that's happening in relation to inequality in our societies. So George Orwell talked about inequality as well, and the idea of the few oppressing the many. And the concept of his books really was to empower the individual over that dictating authority and to refuse to believe in these lies. But these lies, they just undercut your ability to recognize or have faith in anything. So they can create fear. These lies create this fear that we struggle to get away from. And getting back to ChatGPT and AI, the reason I'm starting to feel like I'm in an echo chamber is because I'm recognizing that it's actually spewing out all this information based upon what has been fed to it. So if you can only take from that which has already passed, then you will never form a novel thought. You will never gain novelty from something if you're only using a combination of that which is already passed. Even if it might be drawing it together in a novel way that's never been seen before, it's still drawing past information together in a novel way. Now, you might think to yourself, okay, right, that's fine, but isn't that what we're all doing as well? As we go through school, are we not, ChatGPT and AI, that's like a mechanical version of our biological version of doing it. We go through school, we get taught all this stuff. Is this what we're doing? We're combining this old information we're given in a new way. Well, yeah, except we can also choose not to. So what's combining that old information in together and just doing that and regurgitating out in a new way? That's really the ego. Okay, that's your ego self, and that's the bit that gets afraid of everything, the bit that's kind of sticking with society, the bit that's so concerned with belonging. And belonging was important when you were a child, so forgive your ego for that, because if you hadn't sought to belong as a child, then you wouldn't have had all the things you needed to sustain you. But the soul, the true essence of you that needs the ego to survive, because it needs to be supported in that kind of thing as a child, and it needs to recognize the things that, when your tummy rumbles and you're hungry, we need to eat and that kind of thing, and drink and all of these things that we need to sustain ourselves. But actually, looking through and trying to release this soul aspect of you is something that I think is people are searching for when they search through Eastern philosophy and things like yoga. So it's a really big point within the very beginning of Yoga Sutras is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So the idea of getting rid of all the borrowed thought. So as I just presented us as the idea of a biological version of that kind of multi-layered perceptron. So we're taking in all the information from the past, all the things we've been taught, and putting it together in a way it hasn't been before. I can also put forward then the idea that if we go through this process of getting rid of all the borrowed thought, that's the point at which we really bring forth the uniqueness, the soul essence thing of ourselves. Now, some people do this at different ages. So this can also be thought of as Jung's individuation. So people doing this at different ages and to different levels of success. Some people are hopefully doing it younger and younger now because it feels really good to actually come out the other side of this process. But the process itself is actually a really difficult one. It's a really challenging one. It's something that Joseph Campbell talked about in The Hero's Journey. And so it's something that a lot of our books and our TV and films and things are actually based upon, is that idea of the struggle to actually express and show and become who we truly are. But of course, some people don't ever. And I think it was Bonnie Ware who was working with people who were near end of life, and she looked at the greatest regrets of the dying. And the greatest regret that she came across was that they wished they'd live a life truer to themselves earlier, that they'd been able to live their whole life true to themselves. So this is really where we're coming from now, and this is where my echo chamber that I'm finding myself in is just kind of drumming on my brain. Because if we fall into a trap of using this kind of mechanism of AI and ChatGPT and etc., and thinking that we're creating novelty through that, we're really not. What we're doing is we are creating that very echo chamber. We're feeding the past back into itself without ever going through the process of individuation or getting rid of borrowed thought. and so that we can actually think as the novel entities we are. So it's not really bringing us forward into the future. It's not really freeing that soul entity. And in that way, it just feels a bit icky. Have a look and see if you can see it. And some of the stuff you see on the internet right now, a lot of people are using AI and are using that kind of ChatGPT or designated chat engine context in order to create their posts. I mean, for me, I can see through it. For me, I just scroll on by, unless I really like the person behind it. If I like the person behind it, then I'm like, okay, I like that you're having a nice time doing whatever you're doing. But, your post doesn't reach me. I just skim on by it. I'm not buying from it, because actually it's an echo chamber. I want to know what people truly think. I don't want the echo of something that's already out there regurgitated back to me. So so I think this is quite an interesting thing that's kind of coming in. And like the idea that George Orwell introduced through this is the idea that the object of power is quite dark, really. The object of power is power. So the object of having power is to have more power, to gain more of that kind of control and that ownership. In order to actually do that, you kind of take control of what people need. And so what you do in taking control of what people need is things like, and I think Margaret Atwood hit on this as well in A Handmaid's Tale, you take control of education, medical, and you take control of hope. So you're taking control of, as I said, the truth. You're leading it to the point where it actually doesn't matter. There's a lot of lies out there at the moment. We're not quite sure what is true, right? So the thing is that you can feed the world with so many lies, and some of them don't really seem to matter. But what they're doing is this blanket of lies is undercutting the capacity to see the truth, or capacity to find truth, or capacity to even think that the truth is, as the X-Files said, out there, So that idea that in doing that, you can actually change people's reality. And so in 1984, one of the things is you hear the clock striking 13, and you hear him saying that 2 + 2 is equal to 5. So his reality has been so undercut that he's been reprogrammed with a new reality. So why is this a problem? The clock strikes 12, the clock strikes 13. I mean, time is a human construct. So does it really matter? 2 + 2 = 5, 2 + 2 = 4. As long as we agree on it, does it really matter? Well, yes, it does. Not so much in the literal fact, but more so in the intent behind it. So what's happening here is that literal facts tend to be manipulated by people who are in power. As I said, the object of power is to gain more power. And so it's being manipulated not with any kind of success for the group in mind. It's being manipulated with a hyper-individual sense in mind. Hyper-individualism is a thing that we're really suffering in society right now. This idea that somebody can be very, very wealthy and very, very well off. The idea that somebody can actually do really, really well, despite the fact that a lot of people are suffering or not doing well. In fact, the idea that somebody can even do well from the suffering of others. Now, that is more of an illusion than anything else really in our society right now, because you can see, if you look at places around the world, you can actually see where inequality is driving things that negatively impact everybody. They don't just negatively impact the people who are poorer. The inequalities are actually negatively impacting for everyone. So one of the key ones is crime. So crime occurs much more readily in places where there is huge inequality, and that the crime then is a negative for the people who are without, or the people who are conducting the crime, and the people who are have things and are victims of the crime. It's negative for everyone. Similarly, health. Health and education and things like that, can be huge positives for everyone, but where they are unequal, it can be negative for everyone involved because it fosters an issue in society that then we are all susceptible to. So we're all susceptible to the outcome of. For example, things like disease and that kind of thing spreading, you know. So if we think back in time, we can look at things like cholera and other kind of public health issues where actually the idea that some people couldn't afford to keep clean, couldn't afford to wash, or didn't know how to have the education, didn't know how to, and this kind of thing, didn't know the importance of it, that actually fostered the spread of disease that then killed everybody in the area, whether they were wealthy or poor. So these things actually reach beyond. It's not a case that by having extreme wealth, people can be protected from the issues of being human. So actually, we'd be better served to move together and to actually work together for a better and happier state of being for everyone, and in which case we'll all benefit from that. That might sound like a pie in the sky thing. It might sound like a utopia. It might sound like something that doesn't have any historical background for it. If you type it into ChatGPT, you're probably going to recognize that, or any AI, you're probably going to recognize that that kind of thing hasn't really existed before. But what I'm telling you is that these systems are only able to regurgitate from the past. They're only able to combine from information already fed to them. And even if they combine that information in a novel way, they still are not able to remove all the borrowed knowledge from themselves and have a novel thought. So this utopia, this idea of actually all being better off together, yeah, it might be a novel thought, but that's actually how we move forwards. That's how we project and create a future that is better than what has gone before. It's how we stop repeating patterns. It's how we move onwards in who we are being. Another one of the big issues that we're actually seeing at the moment in society is that we're being sold down the river of an idea that what we want is to be like people who are not happy and satisfied. So if you've looked at people who have extreme wealth and thought to yourself, well, I'd like to be like that, then why exactly are they keeping going? Why exactly are they keeping going, accruing more and more percentage of the global wealth into their own pocket? Why are they going on if they're happy as they are? If they have happiness, if they have peace, why do they need any more? The reason they need more is because they are not peaceful and they are not happy. They have not achieved that which they seek, and so they continue to seek. They continue to seek and they continue to take because they continue to repeat the pattern that they think will bring them to some kind of resolution of happiness and peace. But it hasn't done so before, so why should it do so now? As Einstein said, to repeat the same action over and over again and to expect a different result is madness. And so actually what we've got is we've got this kind of people in charge of our world who are being fashioned by their own madness. They are holding on then to a power that they have and amalgamating and developing and accruing more power through the facet of their own fraud, their own lies, their own intentions for dishonesty, their own undercutting of your reality and everyone else's reality in order to make you feel that you don't really have any other options aside from the one they're feeding you. But you do. You have any option you can think of, any option you can create is yours for the taking. Don't get locked into someone else's story. You choose. Choose you. Because your story matters.
We are all telling our stories. And we are all telling ourselves stories about it all. Are you brave enough to walk with me into hearing, considering, and understanding the stories we tell? Join me next time, where we'll be considering more stories and illusions and stepping into creating the freedom we desire. Every moment, we are who we are choosing to be. You choose. Choose you, because your story matters.